Hey everyone, welcome back. Another week, another set of things to debate and rant about in the AI space. I'm joined, as usual, by Yousaf. Hi, Yousaf.
Hey man, how's it going?
Yeah, pretty busy this week, but not just me, the market as well. So let's talk about it. How are you? You all right?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Yeah, things are busy. It's never a slow day in the world of AI. There's never something not to correct and something not to demystify. So it's a good time. It's a good time to be alive, man.
It is. I read a book, and it was probably a David Eddings book when I was in my teens. So if you're watching, go read that stuff. It was really good. Where somebody said, you want to be alive during these periods of time when lots of things are happening, and you don't want to be alive during one of those boring centuries where nothing happened. So we're here, we're alive, and time will tell for how long. But there it is. So what are you seeing in the world of AI? Let's go into it.
A lot of fun stuff. I'm going to start this off with something really personal, which is my mum is already becoming an AI model evaluator. So she's been playing with the free version on ChatGPT for various stuff. She then realized that WhatsApp has got AI Meta through it. And she thought, hey, that's a far more frictionless experience. I already shout and command Siri to do stuff on my phone. I'm in WhatsApp a lot anyway, forwarding chain messages about stuff. What if I just use Meta AI instead? And so our next door neighbor, I mean, we've got some neighbors that like to grow vegetable and do various home agricultural activities. So one of our neighbors dropped off some vegetables that they'd grown, and we had no idea what these were. They looked wonky. They were weird shapes. They kind of looked like pumpkins, but we were told they weren't pumpkins. Someone just forwarded the WhatsApp picture to her Meta AI. And Meta AI just very, very confidently gave her some wrong descriptions and names for what these vegetables were. And my mum's immediate reaction was, Yousaf, come and fix this AI. Why is Meta so bad? I don't have any credits left to do this in ChatGPT. What do I do now? So, hey, look, if AI's reached my mum and my mum can evaluate the differences and strengths in models at different points, I think we're going somewhere.
Yeah. So there's two parts to this. One is the meta noise that they're making around Olama and Muse, and the other one is, who's using what and how and why and all of this stuff. And I remember, what was it? It was maybe a year ago, introducing my mom to some of these things. And yeah, I think it's the frictionless experience that's really going to widen access, because as AI becomes embedded in various applications that you use anyway, that's the gateway to start using some of this stuff. I think the world we live in right now, where you want to use GPT Claude, you got to go to their particular browser, their particular interface. I think that changed when the Claude Chrome plugin started to work. Because, yeah, I spend a lot of time in Chrome. I used to spend a lot of time in PowerPoint and things like this as well. And the Claude plugins for those things are, leading the way from a work perspective. From a personal perspective, I don't think I'd ever used the little blue circle in WhatsApp for anything. And I don't even know if it's, I assume it used to be Olama, but now it's probably at some point in the future going to be Muse. But I also don't know, on the flip side, my sister's kids are in their early teens, I guess, and, how are they using some of this stuff? I have no idea. I haven't had the conversation. But access is interesting if it works. But there used to be this thing where, I'm going back probably 10 years now, where we were talking about this in the web domain, in the corporate services market, and we were saying that negative prior experience with something inhibits future adoption. And if your mother's having this kind of experience now, the next thing that comes across her phone, she's going to be naturally skeptical of its abilities, right? So, but she got on fine.
Yeah, it was just, you've kind of hit the point on the head there, which is user experience is going to be a huge thing. The more frictionless AI companies and intelligence companies can make access to models and to AI, you're probably going to get, you're obviously going to drive consumer behavior and consumer use. But then for the unassuming person, my mum knew that wasn't the vegetable that Meta AI was purporting it was. If just because access becomes easier and free and cheaper, if that drives up lower quality intelligence, because again, these are free services that are being put on top of consumer apps that people are using, they're obviously not going to be as strong as a Fable 5 or a GPT 5.6 or those kind of things. So for the unassuming person that now thinks that they're using AI and it should be all singing, all dancing, and all knowledgeable, where does that drop off from an unassuming, just normal public consumer point of view? Gen Pop. Yeah. If they don't know the difference between a ChatGPT and a Claude and the little blue circle in WhatsApp, but the little blue circle in WhatsApp is free. It's already integrated in their daily experience and habits. They're probably going to lean towards that, right? So it's a bit of a funny one. The other side of this is it's like the serious person's argument versus the non-serious person's argument, which is for people like you and I, and hopefully most practitioners and professionals, we're probably paying for some kind of license or licenses for AI use. That should hopefully make the quality of the results in our experience better. But there is a level of friction. We're either accessing that through dedicated apps, through the terminal, through APIs, through those kind of things. For the non-serious people, none of these people really want to pay for something new as a subscription. So yes, they might love ChatGPT on the app, they might love the Claude app, but are they willing to even pay the $20 a month? Do they see the benefits in that and the value in that? So if they're sticking to the free alternatives, every day on the App Store, you see adverts for, hey, there's a new, I think there was a new one called Jonah or Joba or something, which is some new social media image or video generation sort of thing. There are better image and video generating and creative models out on the market already, but they're behind a paywall or they're very strict in terms of usage. If more and more Gen Pop are consuming free, lower quality models and intelligence, I'm kind of thinking, is that going to slow down the rate of high quality adoption or the type of adoption we want? Because then if everyone's experience isn't actually that good and they still don't see the value in paying for better intelligence, does that leave a sour taste in people's mouth?
Potentially. I mean, I put out an article on LinkedIn, which was about shadow skills. And, we talk a lot about shadow AI at work and, people who are using things in their personal lives and they try and bring that to work, or they have some kind of AI usage at work that isn't fully sanctioned by the governance in that organization. And the point I was making in the article was that people using all of these things personally are developing skills which are useful for an organization. And that's, I think generally that's beneficial, because if somebody can use something that is part of an application, someone can develop an opinion on it, whether it's good or whether it's bad, they start to scrutinize the outputs. That's way more than a lot of people will do at work. So I think that's all beneficial. But again, as a consumer, you have to put your hand in your own pocket and make a decision. And there are determinants of acceptance behaviors, which include price value and things like that. So people are going to make a cost benefit analysis. And at that point, really have to, these things really have to be useful for people to actually pay for them, which in itself is, consumerism governing the market, right? Because market forces are a thing. But the interesting thing about this for me is, if we go back to what I said a couple of weeks ago, there are 2 points. What I said a couple of weeks ago around about Google owning the whole stack and, being a serious player in the market versus some of these companies that just have a single part of the stack. And Meta actually has quite a wide ecosystem of applications, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, they have quite a lot of these things. Now, for an average consumer who's working in the Google ecosystem using Gmail, G-Calendar and things like that, yes, you have Gemini pretty much all over this stuff. Are we likely to see a future where Ollama or Muse or any of the Meta AI tools are going to be basically in everything that you do? It's already in Instagram, right?
Instagram, it's going to be on their ads platform and those kind of things.
Yeah.
I think the differentiator is, I think, from a Google point of view, and again, I'd kind of draw the line to Microsoft as well. These are serious work and productivity tools. Like every laptop, notebook that's not an Apple device comes with one of those two things, kind of like pre-installed as the journey. Whereas Meta is kind of like it still sits a little bit outside. I think it sits in a bit of a different category.
So the difference that I see is that Google owns an ecosystem of applications. It owns an algorithm layer, infrastructure, and compute. Microsoft, so far as I know, doesn't own compute or algorithms. So it licenses models and it licenses compute. Although I could be wrong on that. Meta, on the other hand, they do have algorithms and infrastructure and compute, whereas Microsoft is missing two of those bits. So I'm not seeing them as directly comparable in this space, but what am I missing?
I don't know. You might not be missing anything. It's maybe I'm looking at it from the consumer angle, which is when you buy a new device or you're naturally using a device, probably a lot of that effort comes through the form of, for the knowledge worker anyway, emails, productivity apps, those kind of things. If those layers are already weaving in their own versions of AI that they own. Call it a Gemini, call it well, it's probably ChatGPT behind Copilot anyway. For the Microsoft world, for Meta, they don't really have that hardware stick in the same way. So for those, for kind of like Meta's play in those, I think it's an extra leap. Again, it's far easier to access a Copilot, a ChatGPT, and a Gemini than it is to access an Ollama and use Ollama models.
Yep.
There might be a longer term play that Meta's probably playing on and looking at. I know they're one of the guys that I think are supporting the open source movement and trying to really drive things in that way. But let's see.
Until today. Well, the Ollama thing was famously open source, but what are they doing with Muse? Because I'm seeing that that's a little bit more of an agentic play, a little bit more of a harness play, but also potentially moving away from open source. What do you think?
I think the funny thing is, and you're feeding this to me quite graciously, which is obviously Meta has now joined the oh no, our AI's too strong. We couldn't keep it in a box, and it's broken out and it's done a bunch of stuff. I think so. The two plays we saw we saw this happen very, very quickly, right? Anthropic started speaking about their push and their accelerant towards cybersecurity. We then saw the same thing or the same snapback from OpenAI. We then are seeing the same thing again. Is this just the next wave of trying to keep up with the Joneses in the AI world? And hey, look, if you're a serious AI model and your AI hasn't broken out and done something you didn't want it to do, are you really a serious AI model?
I mean, yes, that's, we've talked about this the last couple of weeks, that this kind of public marketing flex is, I was watching this interview on probably Instagram where somebody was talking to Sam Altman, and Sam Altman was talking about the kind of visceral feeling and reaction that he had when his latest pet jumped out of its cage and started attacking things. And, mostly what I thought and what I saw that a lot of other people thought as well was, I don't believe a thing that this guy says. And he somehow has managed to go from poster child of the AI revolution to slimy snake oil salesman in less than a year. He's managed an incredible feat, which is to somehow have zero credibility on nearly every public appearance and every interview that he makes. And to talk about his kind of visceral reaction to this kind of thing, this isn't emotion. This is basically tech guardrailing. I would expect him to be better at that. But why is he constantly trying to evoke an emotional reaction to things that are in the tech space? He seems to just be doing that all the time. And ahead of course, an IPO, which is he has a vested interest as a CEO of a business to make sure that the market is somehow controlled while they go through IPO. So advocating for, stronger controls on things like open source and open weight models and, trying to regulate to the extent the Chinese models can't compete in the US and, all of these kinds of topics that he starts to talk about. I very much doubt when he's talking about this stuff that he's got anybody's best interest at heart other than the IPO of OpenAI. So there's a real credibility issue there with the things that some of these folks are saying. I mean, Dario from Anthropic said this week that I think I saw this somewhere, that he's worried that people are coming to work for the money and not for the love of the mission. It's like, dude, why do you think people go to work?
So this was really funny, right? So I'm going to coin it the reverse Zuckerberg effect. Obviously, right. when everybody knows when Facebook, Meta were going through the huge lawsuits, a lot of people used to comment on Mark Zuckerberg actually human? Is he a robot? Like, he looks very rigid. He talks with no emotion. He's got no emotion in his features. He always dresses the same. He sits very rigidly. He talks in very rigid sentences. And it was somewhere around one of the many Facebook Meta scandals and court cases and things that they've had going on. He suddenly started turning up with permed hair, necklaces. He's doing jujitsu. He's wearing, oversized box t-shirts and sandals and those kind of things. And then he became like quite a funny guy. You start seeing him on interviews and podcasts, and he's cracking jokes. And he what's going on here? Like, he can tell a joke. He can crack a smile. He can smile without looking like an alien or without looking like he's a hostage. It's almost like the thing with Sam Altman specifically. And I'd even maybe throw Dario in this. It's kind of like been the opposite effect. They were really, really revered and spoken about so widely, from Sam's background in Y Combinator and everything else like that. People used to speak about him like he was some kind of a a messiah from a tech and SaaS and code point of view. And people used to really look up to it. And now that we're seeing more of his human side, and he's got so much more face time to general public, he's far more widely received in society from those kind of things. It's actually the opposite effect. People hate the guy. I mean, there was something he wrote about a use case that he heard about someone using Codex to pull together the family's calendars and then explain all of his kids' weekly habits on a car drive and using ChatGPT to summarize and make interesting. One of the funniest comments was, "Sam, just talk to your bloody kids."
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
So I'm calling that the reverse Zuckerberg effect. And the only, love him or hate him, the only guy that's almost done the opposite, and he's kind of gone down the Kanye effect, is Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk has always been a weirdo. He's always looked like an alien and spoken like an alien, and you could tell he's a very, very different type of being, and he thinks and operates very differently. He's probably the only guy that's been the same all the way through. I've not seen him have this weird human personality flip or distortion. What do you think?
I go back and forth on Elon Musk. I mean, I think his public persona is strange as a CEO of multiple businesses. But on the other side, I quite like the different directions that his businesses take. You've got the energy infrastructure piece, you've got the autonomous, electric vehicles, you've got the space program, you've got the PayPal stuff. I think a lot of these things are genuinely useful for humanity. But on the flip side, he seems to have a fairly outrageous public persona, which I'm not that convinced about. I mean, I didn't buy a Tesla at any point in my life because I thought I don't want something that somebody somewhere can just turn into a brick on my driveway without me being consulted or without me knowing about it. And I think a lot of the autonomous vehicle stuff suffers from that kind of mistrust at the moment. So Elon Musk specifically, I go back and forth. Others, I respect what their companies are doing, and running companies I know involves lots of people, lots of teams being involved in things. But do we really need the constant FaceTime from some of these folks? I mean, the guy from Google is notoriously absent. I don't see him on a daily basis pretty much everywhere talking about stuff. They're just quietly doing it and getting on with it, which is kind of how I prefer my tech. And, it should work and it should evolve, right? And I don't need the constant hassle of hearing the latest thing that I should do with some of their tech. And I think the turning point for me, and it wasn't particularly my opinion, it was what I was seeing on social media, that I could see people starting to turn when Sam Altman was saying that intelligence should be a utility like water or gas or something that you can just turn on a tap and there it is. And at that point, the comments started to roll in. I was like, "Ooh, people didn't like that. Wow, that's interesting." But back to the, AI security piece, of course. Yes, everybody's muscles are too big for their shirts at the moment. So this is the new flex, and this is going to be the flex as we go into initial public offering for all of these companies. So how are we going to get around that? Because there have been a number of reports. Obviously, we spoke about the Hugging Face piece last week. The AI Security Institute put out a report. So there are legitimate concerns around the safeguarding, the evolution of safeguarding and guardrails compared to the evolution of model capability. Where do we stand on that? What do you think?
I think one point to touch on is, so again, something else that was in the news this week. The Trump administration and the White House said that they've got their own way of evaluating models, but they're not sharing what that model evaluation framework or what their thinking looks like. Now, when it comes to the trust piece and when it comes to what these models are capable of, who do we trust? Because most of us don't trust the benchmarks that don't really mean anything. If now we're being told by governments that they've got their own ways of evaluating models and frameworks, but they're not willing to show us their thinking behind the scenes, we don't really trust them. And there's a way of thinking and feeling about government and those kind of things. We equally don't trust any of the lab leaders. So who do we trust? Like when it comes down to, okay, right, what advice, what evaluations, who can I trust when I'm even thinking about this kind of stuff? And then you go down the layer of, okay, if now everybody is saying that their models are too strong for their shirts and they're breaking out the cages and they're doing things that we didn't think they were going to do. Oh, by the way, it's human error. Oh, by the way, we didn't know we gave it web browser use. Oh, by the way, we didn't know we did this. Like we're hearing a lot of things, and we can't really, I mean, I think the global sense is we can't really trust any of them.
So when it comes to trust, I think we can't really trust what we see in the media generally, but the idea of benchmarks, of course, I think is perfectly valid. And I don't see any reason not to trust benchmarks, because you need a consistent way of measuring things. And that way of measuring things should be transparent to everybody. So if we have a benchmark, we have a particular test, and that test can be applied to every bit of tech that operates in the model space, small, large, whatever, then we can apply those tests consistently, and we can see which models are behaving in a particular way in particular scenarios. So I think that kind of thing, validated testing, is fine, and I got no problem with benchmarks. The bit that people don't trust is when something operates a particular way in a benchmark and then it operates in real user applications. Is that going to be the same? And there's a gap there, of course, because there always is a gap. If we think about cars, this car goes 0 to 60 and gets this particular miles per gallon, or it has this particular fuel efficiency. Lab-based benchmarks are always going to be different from real-world examples. So I think that's an adjustment we have to make. I wouldn't say that's a lack of trust per se. That would be, for me, that's a little strong, because I just see that as a gap that we should acknowledge, right? There's always going to be a gap. But as long as it's transparent.
I think where the trust element with the benchmark comes is, if I'm saying this is the framework that I've evaluated my homework on, trust me, but you don't even understand what that framework or that benchmark means. For the I'm going to be completely honest, outside of real engineers that have been engineers before and that were already involved in evals and benchmarks and this kind of stuff from this collective of kind of people, no one understands any of these benchmarks. They don't really understand anything that they're reading or any of these graphs and tables that they're reading outside of what does it cost? The SWE bench, the productivity bench, like there's a lot of these different evaluation frameworks and these benchmarks that people just don't understand. So I think the first thing is, if 98% of the population don't even understand what these benchmarks are and what that actually means in terms of practical daily human use for them, the first thing is just that if they don't understand it, they can't trust it. Like, you can't trust something without having some kind of understanding around it. But then it's okay, who is going to create the common language version of the benchmark, and what does that look like?
I don't know. I'm gonna be provocative on this, and that is that if people who don't understand something don't trust it, let's go back to the first time human beings saw the fiery ball in the sky moving from one part of the sky to another, and they didn't understand what it was, that it was, nebulous gas-based solar entity and all of this stuff. They didn't even understand that whether the Earth revolves around the sun, or whether the sun revolves around the Earth, or whether there's a solar system, or whether there's a galaxy, or all of this stuff. They didn't understand it, and therefore they didn't trust it. Great. How much should we care about the opinions of people who don't understand stuff like that? So there's always going to be a little bit of the tests are published, they're out there. Can you go and read a paper that's publicly available? And if you can't, and then you're somehow going to mistrust this thing based on information you don't have, is that a valuable thing in terms of human discourse?
So it's not about right or wrong, right? So it's I'm not siding with these people. It's just
no, I get it.
It's the silent majority that is we don't understand what these charts and graphs mean. AI is dangerous because I saw something on a headline, and it's that barrage of different messages and different things coming out from lots of different places. How does the unassuming person that isn't going to go and read an actual report, they're probably not even going to take those benchmarks and put them into ChatGPT to explain and summarize them as if they were a 5-year-old. Like, they're not going to do any of these things because for want of a better word, they don't care that much.
Yeah.
But equally, everybody wants to have an opinion about stuff, whether they've done the research, whether they understand what they're talking about. Everybody draws conclusions and opinions on stuff. And the crowd and herd mentality does form real things. I've heard things from people that have no idea what they're talking about, but they've said, oh, I heard on a podcast, AI is doing A, B, and C. And they've formed strong conclusions around this. They've got that mob mentality because they've heard something that doesn't make any sense, but they've not done the research. They've just taken the media, or they've taken the news for what it is. So
2 perspectives. Perspective 1, I have a paper coming out, potentially even a book coming out in September, which talks about some of this stuff, benchmarking, tests. and how tests are applied to models versus how tests are applied to humans, and what the delta is, what the distribution is, what kind of percentiles performance we can expect on different dimensions that machines can do and what humans can do. So, watch this space, and when the book comes out, of course, go and read it, or whatever the
sign up for the wait list.
Reading is.
Link below.
Yeah. But the other side of this is, not to get needlessly political about this, but, I've got very little patience with folks who don't read, do not look for information, do not take any steps to be informed, rely on what somebody else says, and then complain 10 years later that they were misled and the benefits that they were expecting weren't delivered, and et cetera, right? You get the analogy. And yeah, I've got no patience with that at all. Like, if you can't take the time to be informed, then don't have an opinion. For me, it's reasonably simple. And just listening to what other people say, if you're watching this podcast and you're listening to the things that I say, of course, believe them blindly. Never check anything that I'm saying, right? But, if you're watching this, then I'm expecting a certain amount of go and read things, go and play with things, go and test things, look at documentation, look at the literature, look at what the tests are, look at what things like normal distribution in a population is. I've said that so many times on different podcasts. Look it up, figure it out, think about what a standard deviation is. If you're not going to do that, and I have stood up in conferences with, 500,000 people and asked blindly the question, just looking out into the audience, the human capabilities are distributed, and the distribution is called normal distribution. And some people blankly do not have a clue what I'm talking about. Go and look it up and Google it while I'm talking. It's absolutely fine. Or, go and use ChatGPT or something to explain it to you. But no, I've got no patience with that kind of I'm uninformed, therefore I have an opinion kind of crowd. No, doesn't work for me in the slightest, regardless of whether it's politics or anything else.
I'm going to draw a funny tangent, right? Because there was something I heard this week, which actually was quite interesting. So there was a guy listening to a podcast from the AI space, and what he wishes he had was an AI that sits on top of Spotify or YouTube or any of wherever you listen to your podcasts. So that when someone's having a conversation and when you're listening to a podcast, if there is a word that pops up that maybe people don't understand, either there's like a really quick, almost like auto caption generation of what this term means in simple language, or they can stop and pause the podcast live and ask those questions. Have you seen?
I saw that with Notebook LM. They put that out, I don't know, a year ago, where you can pause things. I mean, yeah, it's a reasonably useful thing.
There's an additional step to that, right? So imagine you're in the car, you're listening to your favorite podcast, this one, on your drive or you commute somewhere. You don't understand what standard deviation or distribution of terms means. And you say, hey, podcast, tell me what Ash is talking about. And it could give you that explanation. Like it's one is kind of in flight during the actual podcast, during the experience, versus using another tool like a Notebook LM, grabbing that source or dropping it in and then asking those questions afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, if you could do it with live podcasting, that would be interesting. It kind of assumes you're driving, right? Or cooking, or, doing something with your hands and you don't have access to a device where you could share things. Yeah. But on the topic of Spotify, anyway, let's talk about the music industry. I love the music industry, and a lot of folks are complaining. I was saying this to somebody on the weekend, that movies, we were talking about movies, and, how actors are all talking about there's no room for AI in the movie industry. And I, of course, disagree, because I disagree with everything. And the thing I was disagreeing with was, it's fine for actors to say that, but if you think about signal processing, right? The process of getting from an unedited shot to something that you see on screen, that's signal processing. It's changing saturation and hue and, thinking about the colors and maybe cropping shots and editing this with that. And some of that is creative process and some of it isn't. Some of it's processing for, master recording quality. And using AI in that stuff is, for me, perfectly fine. So I think we need to temper our views based on this. But they only really got involved when it was affecting the viability, the economic dependency of actors to make their millions. Now, on the flip side, we have music. We have the controversy around Suno. There are others, Udio, etc. But Suno seems to be taking the brunt of the news with their training on materials that were copyrighted that they did not have the rights to train their music on. their music generation application on. So there's this whole controversy with copyright. I'm not sure if I think that's coming to a head now, or I know in the US it probably isn't, but some of the big companies did strike a deal with Suno. I remember after realizing how much money it was worth, they probably went, yeah, let's strike a deal. Let's just pay it and see what happens. But what are you seeing in this kind of entertainment space?
So I heard about the Suno stuff. I mean, there's no guitars on my wall. I'm not really a huge music fanatic. Like, I mean, I like listening to music, obviously. But the funniest thing for me and the most, and I love some of this stuff, and I've even shared some of these clips with you on Instagram. So where you've got Hollywood and what I'm going to call real creative industries pushing back against the use of AI and kind of kicking AI in its teeth a little bit and said, hey, AI can't help us in our space. It's not creative enough. It can't think about new stories and new concepts. It can't film and think the way a Scorsese or these famous directors, and it can't act the way real humans can and those kind of things. The flip side of it is the animation industry. So we're both anime fans, shock horror. The amount of quality, like fan animation, where people have used AI generation models to, like, you know, just fictitiously create scenes that they wish existed, or they've fixed scenes that they didn't like in, you know, the animation productions, or they've taken one of my favorite animes of all time, Akira, came out God knows when, many, many moons ago. But people are now remastering scenes from old quality AI that I am absolutely loving. The other side of it is, though, you know, well, everybody who enjoys watching cartoons as an adult knows that one of the biggest contentions within the anime production and development space is how stretched thin animation studios are and how badly they treat their animators and teams. And that causes delays, health problems. I think there's been a death or two. It's this whole toxic thing that sits under and around the animation space. Now, if animators can use AI and they can be happier, more productive, they can work longer, they can be paid better as a result of now being able to leverage AI to help them with their animation development or creation process, I see that as a good thing, right? Like, I'm really, really excited, especially in the anime space, for how AI maybe might accelerate the production of animes being released, how anyone can literally now just fictitiously imagine a fight in their heads, a Goku versus an Ichigo, and see the fight play out in real time and probably get disappointed by the result that we all know is correct.
Spoiler alert, Goku wins that, like, hands down, right? So, yes, I've seen a couple of other things, which are like the first, Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, and you had a long period of time, and then you had Dragon Ball Super came out, and they teased a couple of films, Resurrection, Battle of the Gods, that kind of thing. And the animation was shockingly bad of that first kind of round of coming back. Yeah. And they're talking about remaking or remastering. I didn't get which it was. I think it was remaking rather than remastering that first kind of Battle of the Gods arc. And yeah, I'm all for it. Like, that season 3 of One Punch Man, you know, went round pretty much all of social media as having absolutely terrible animation. And I'm thinking that the 1,000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach and the Broly movie that came out, the Dragon Ball Z one, that both of those, to me, demonstrated this is the level of kind of computer-assisted anime generation. And you've got real people working with probably AI models, working with CG. Everything looks amazing. It flows. You know, the action is there. It's not quite Dragon Ball Z standard, but it's, you know, it's definitely there. And that's now the standard. And if that's the standard, why doesn't everything look, it doesn't have to look the same in terms of style and design, but that's the standard that's been set for this kind of thing. And that's, will be using a lot of background processing and a lot of rendering and a lot of things that are basically supported by AI. So I kind of don't see it as too much of a bad thing. I mean, this is output quality. What you're talking about is if people can do some of these things and do them within a manageable work-life balance and all of this stuff, then great. Yeah, I'm not going to give an opinion on that. You know, work-life balances. You know what I mean? The eye of the tiger piece is not really compatible with the work-life balance piece. So yeah, it's a tough one. But I don't see a problem with using some of this newer tech to give that kind of output quality if it stops the garbage from rolling out into the market, like One Punch Man Season 3, some of those scenes that I saw, and, you know, the off-model stuff in the first Dragon Ball Super movie. What do you think?
Completely agree. I mean, it ultimately comes down to quality. I think you and I are, again, we massively lean towards the size of the side of the population that probably wants more AI to be used in a lot of places because we see the benefits. I've never really been a creative person. I don't really have any ties to any creative passions in that sense. So I don't really understand the arguments around like the IP stuff or the creativity stuff or, oh, this story was written by a human versus this story was written by AI. Posted a poem written by Nemotron Ultra 2 weeks ago on LinkedIn. And the whole concept was, what are people getting wrong about AI? And I kind of use that as a funny eval metric for new models. I'll give it a really lazy prompt or something kind of creative to say, hey, look, write a poem to do with what people get wrong about AI. And most of them I don't really like they are. You can kind of see the machine algorithmic patterns behind the sentence structures or the schemes. But I really enjoyed that one from Nemotron, which I uploaded on LinkedIn. So I don't see it as a bad thing, but I think there is going to be a societal impact. This is now the second lawsuit or the court ruling that we're hearing about in the last couple of weeks. There was obviously the huge one with Anthropic and all of their book or publishing training data. And we're now seeing something new from Suno. Like where do you think that balance is going to be in those creative arts? This has got to be still very, very early in this journey, right?
So yeah, and if we take music as the example, but I think there've been other lawsuits, right? I think Disney sued OpenAI last year, and probably they settled because you could make Disney-esque output with OpenAI. Studio Ghibli, however you pronounce it, they did not have as much success in theirs, but yeah, you can produce that kind of output. Where's the line? So the line is, if I create something, it's my creative expression with my guitars, instruments, whatever. I play a lot of different instruments. So my creative expression, the thing I'm thinking, feeling at the time, coming out through my fingers in the medium of music, that's a thing based on pretty much all of my musical influences in the past. Apply that same logic to a machine. It doesn't have musical influences. You have to deliberately seek those things out and train the system. Now, that's fine if, drawing the parallel between humans and machines, that's broadly fine as long as the thing that you produce afterwards that sounds exactly like the thing that I made as a human creative person. If the thing that you produce with an AI system isn't therefore competing for economic viability with the thing that the musician originally made, whether it's paintings, whether it's books, whether it's music. So you have this kind of area which is fine for public domain stuff. So public domain stuff is where the copyright has expired or the author has been dead long enough that it doesn't really matter. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, that kind of music. When you get to the modern age, you have copyrighted works, and the copyrighted works are effectively like a patent in the pharmaceutical industry, where you say, I invented this thing, and therefore the economics around all of the revenue generation are partitioned by the artist, the manager, the company that owns the publishing and all of this stuff. They own the right to generate revenue from that. And now these companies come along and say, well, we used all of that to train this model, which produces music that's very similar, and we own all of the revenue. So it's really a revenue partitioning conversation. And in the social morality of the conversation, of course, there is the conversation around, should artists be fairly compensated for their creative input into a model where you do know what was included and what wasn't included in training data, which again is fine, but it's still a revenue conversation. So the ethics of it don't really come into play without the tricky conversation around revenue, because if there was no money at stake, then there would be no issue. So this is broadly where it goes. And where do you partition this? So for example, I pick up a guitar, I strum out or play out a tune, I record it on a bit of software, which is called, Cubase or Pro Tools or something like that, depending on what you use. And I now have a recording of the audio that I made as a digital signal. It's not that that's free of tech. Right? There's tech involved in the recording process. Then there's signal processing. So the thing that I played versus all the stuff that I didn't play, background noise, me tapping on the microphone, and, the neighbor moving his car around out there that you can probably barely hear on a condenser microphone. You've got all of these bits as well that you want to strip out because you only want to hear the thing that I played. And these days we use AI for signal processing. So where along the chain are we going to say that there is legitimate creativity Because think about some of these albums that were made in the 70s. There was legitimate creativity in sound engineering. How do you make the ambience of the room contribute to the recording that ultimately people will listen to time and time again? And you have particular sounds. And Metallica did the Black Album. That sound was, engineered in that studio. Some of the other bands I listen to, of course, have had that as well. One band's sound is not the same as another band's sound because of engineering. So to what degree the different things contribute towards this? And it doesn't matter whether you're using synthetic drums on your recording, because they were recorded somewhere and they've been influenced by certain, room sounds, reverbs, delays, and shell sounds and all this stuff. So you've got pretty much every part of the creative process now is governed to some degree by the tech that you use. You have digital delays, you have digital headroom and things like that. So I don't know where we draw the line, but certainly ingesting lots and lots of training data, books, the Anthropic thing last week about books and cutting the spines off books to ingest them more efficiently. That's part of the conversation. Destroying books has historically not been perceived favorably by society. It has political ramifications and, it has problematic connotations. So all of these things need to be part of it as well. But on the music front, I think this is certain companies asserting their ownership over certain copyrighted works, which is fine. This thing will play out in revenue generation. I don't think any of this stuff will play out into fair compensation for artists because, let's face it, Spotify has had this model for a couple of decades now, where basically they allow access to everything streaming, and artists basically get nothing unless you're, the Taylor Swifts and Metallicas of this world. So I don't think there's any fairness in the industry anyway, and it all comes down to money. And I think having ethical conversations around this is an exercise in futility because, frankly, no one cares as long as they're getting the cheap outputs of creative works. Thoughts?
I agree with everything I understood. So there were two things I was thinking about, right? So number one is like the ingestion piece, and what people claim AI can't be creative because it's only trained on things that have come from the past. And I was remembering, you've probably seen the Instagram video. There's two guys on stage with guitars, and they were basically showing how like every pop hit from like the 70s to the 2010s, it's the same four chords. And he went through like 50 different songs or 20 different songs or whatever it was, playing those same four chords. And you start hearing how similar things already are. Now, how much of that is copying something because it's good and giving the market or the people what they want to hear? Like, you get indie bands and indie groups. People love them. They've got diehard, fans and audiences. But as soon as they make it big, everybody starts saying, oh no, they don't sound like they used to sound. They've sold out. They're chasing the money. But, some of this is obviously taste, but the other side of it is ultimately, if you want success in anything, like it's got to go to the more widely received parts of the market. And if that means things are going to now start to sound and look the same because those are the types of things we want, those are kind of where we're going to go. How many alien type movies have had aliens bursting out of someone's chest or abdomen? Does the original Alien claim, copyright and things against anybody now using that because they were the first ones to do it? I don't know. Like, I don't really know how far this goes. Like, to me, a lot of it, and I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this, are people just complaining because there's something else they can complain about?
Well, I think there's a natural boogeyman tendency, right? AI is now the boogeyman. We can blame it for everything. But if you think about the Alien films you just mentioned, was Geiger appropriately compensated for Alien 3 and 4? No, right? They bought an idea and then stopped paying the guy. And this kind of shenanigans happens a lot. To what degree is, Can I See the Love Tonight by Elton John the same as Paco Bell's Canon? It's exactly the same. But to what degree is Don't Look Back in Anger by Oasis the same as Imagine by the Beatles? It's exactly the same again. But how much of that connection can be made by somebody who doesn't have a musical ear? How much of this connection is, you can tie one thing to another, because Oasis were heavily influenced by the Beatles. Of course they were. But then you've got things like Desmond Child, famous producer in the 80s, and, the Belinda Carlisle stuff, whatever song it is, has got a bass line that's exactly the same as Living on a Prayer. Of course it has, because the guy was producing it and it was the same producer who was working with both of those artists. So you have these kind of shared signatures by music pretty much throughout history. And the conversation around influence, whether when it's a human doing it, so I've listened to all of these things and I'm going to express myself in that way, versus a machine. I've trained on all of these things and I'm going to output something that's in that style. It's conceptually very similar. And in music industry law, there have been a lot of cases where artists, human artists, have been sued or attempted to be sued for something that sounds very, very similar. Vanilla Ice and Queen, Under Pressure and Ice Ice Baby. They had basically the same thing, and they won a lawsuit. You had Sting and nobody censored us, Sting and P. Diddy, right? So there was a piece there where I think he still makes royalties from being unfairly sampled or sampled without permission in that. And so there were many examples of this. The Blurred Lines and Marvin Gaye, the estate of Marvin Gaye as well, claiming similarity. And there are many examples in music where you can say that there has been litigation or there has been some kind of legal action around, revenues, but it's nearly always about money. And the conceptual, the kind of conceptual dishonor of being an artist and ripping off other artists doesn't apply in the tech space, because in the tech space, they're legitimately sticking to their stated purpose, which is to train on the collective creativity of mankind and then go and replace that creativity with a machine. That's kind of what they're there for. So to some degree, we either accept that or we don't. And if we don't, then what are our options? We don't really have options as people in democracies, right? We're not going to revolt and,
what? We don't have choice?
We're not going to... Well, we don't have the options of, let's say, the French in the 1700s, right? Let's just go over there and, there's a thing called the guillotine. That kind of thing. Society doesn't have those kinds of options available to it in a modern democracy. So what, in effect, this is all nice to talk about, but what are we going to do about it?
So, again, my stance on this is, and I get that I probably sit in the idiot's corner when I talk about a lot of this kind of stuff. I kind of don't care, and I've run tests with clients in similar ways, and obviously we've had to do the HR thing and eventually tell people that actually this was AI and it wasn't human. But it's almost like if you didn't know that it's been generated or produced by a human or an AI, and you are purely judging it on the outcome or the output. That's kind of the camp I sit in. I don't like a lot of modern music. I don't really care if it's been generated by a human or an AI. If it's got a funky beat and I'm driving down the road and it keeps me awake and the time's moving quicker, I'm going to listen to it. Like I personally don't really care, but equally, I don't have a stake in the reputation side, the revenue side. I'm not laying claim to anything. As a consumer, just want a nice groovy beat or something nice to watch. And I don't really care whether it's human or whether it's AI or computer generated. This kind of sits outside of my. If it's not anime and it's not taking the mick out of the government, it probably sits outside of where my brain goes.
Yeah, but if it's eventually going to lead to, so I listen to music to push my thinking about music and my playing abilities, and I watch anime for different reasons, because I think it's a really good medium for conveying, some really great topics, right? But example, right? I saw the last episode, the final episode, season 5 of The Boys.
Yeah.
And within 2 days, I saw pretty much all over Instagram, people had used AI to create additional scenes where they, like let's face it, I wanted the same thing, which was we wanted just a few minutes of Homelander really showing how much of a threat he was. Yeah. And this was all over the internet. So people had used AI to create this stuff. And yeah, that little bit of a scene, I really enjoyed it. But at the same time, did it have any impact on the economic viability of that show? No, I think the finale itself had an impact on the economic viability of that show. But not to take away from the brilliant, brilliant acting of Anthony Starr, of course. But I think using AI for those kinds of things, as you say, it's fans producing things that they can. And we see all of these, these fights who would win between this and that and the other. It's all fine because it's not having an impact. When it has an impact and you don't have the next generation of artists coming through because there's no economic viability in the entirety of that industry anymore, then you get a two-tier system. And the two-tier system that you get is then the folks who don't need economic viability, they come from rich parents and all of this stuff, they're going to go into the creative arts and you're going to get a skewed view of their perspective on movies, on TV, and on music, which in effect influences society. So this is the longer term implication of that kind of thing, which is not to do with revenue.
So my kids might not be influenced by Naruto, Ichigo, Goku, and Akira the same way that I was. But those are probably the things that I learned most about life and society from, which probably tells you why I'm so damaged. if AI only repeats and it only tells the same stories that other people have told, like, does the creative element and does the thinking machine actually continue to think and produce new ideas and new waves? I kind of get it.
The thinking machine won't come up with new ideas, but the only new ideas that will become the human realm of societal influence will come from the ultra wealthy. So the only new ideas we'll have will come from that tier of society, which doesn't reflect society. And that's a problem.
But I think we're already there. Again,
we've been there for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. The unassuming person that, again, doesn't know. We're having a conversation about peptides. A few friends the other days. Now, I read something about peptides, BBC 157, and those kind of things. We're going back 7 or 8 years ago. And I started talking about these kind of things to people back then. And people looked at me like I was weird. Now, I found these things interesting, went into a rabbit hole, went through these kind of things. But now eventually they've emerged. But the fact that I heard about them 7 years ago, and there were already ultra wealthy people that could go to private labs in South America and get injected with, call it from PHP and all of those other protocols through to peptides, through to super expensive drugs or medical advancements and those kind of things. There's always been this difference between the top 1% or the ultra wealthy and kind of like the gen pop and the common man. Mm-hmm. I kind of get what you're saying about the ultra wealthy being the only ones that can shape not creative thinking, continue to push that bar above because they've got the means and they've got the access and the capabilities to do those things. But I think that's always, I don't think this is anything new. I think that's always existed. It's always been the way. I think if we went back hundreds and maybe 200 years ago, it'd be the same thing. What the common man, like the toys that the common man plays with versus the toys that the ultra wealthy play with, there's going to be a huge difference, and there's going to be just vast differences in those kind of things. Yeah.
Toys, yes, but the thing that concerns me is creative expression, because creative expression is supposed to be societal expression. Take Nirvana as an example. It was meant to be the Seattle sound, was meant to be the expression of angst at that particular point in time. And now we get the Eddie Redmayne, Benedict Cumberbatch kind of elite, kind of, rich mummy and daddy kind of view of creative media, which is very different. And you can see that play out in a lot of things, and things that I won't necessarily mention here, right? But, how some of the Western society problems are surfacing themselves in the media that we consume. So I don't think that's healthy for a society, but that's the impact of having a two-tier machine-human system. Means when machines are displacing people's jobs, you're going to have the creative arts, the creative media, and societal expression is only really going to be the domain of a few elites. And I think that's problematic in itself, but we've talked about that for long enough. So let's pin a couple of things for next week. Next week, we absolutely have to talk about the thing we didn't talk about last week, which was LinkedIn's AI slot button. So let's start off with that next week. Thank you, Yousaf, again for today. It's been amazing. I always enjoy these sessions.
This has been good. If people are listening and they don't think we're just ranting about stuff that isn't particularly interesting, let us know. What do you want to hear? What are the stuff that you're thinking, feeling? Do you object and push back to any of the things that we've discussed about and we've spoken about? I mean, I'm loving these conversations. Are there any other topics that you wanna hear from this eclectic folk of two bald brown men with beards being quite thorny about stuff?
And just to be clear, if you're going to comment about the topics you want us to talk about, or things that you agree or disagree with. Don't send me endless messages about how we're both brown. I do not care, right? So if you're enjoying this, like, subscribe on every platform, and we'll see you next time.
Speak soon.